Well, hello and welcome to the THC show. I haven't seen you folks since last year. That's an old joke, but I'm an old guy. The THC show is truth, hope, and change. You know, of course, it's also about THC because there's a lot of talk about THC on the show, but we're very interested in finding the truth about such things because we've been lied to for a long time about all things cannabis, and getting to the truth is a very important part of our journey here on this planet. And so, we get to the truth and we find out that, well, things aren't as good as they could be, that there's a lot of corruption going on. There's a lot of ways that, our public servants are not actually serving the public's interest, and especially when you look at the cannabis file and the attempt to prohibit cannabis for all these years, you start to understand just how corrupt things can be, because cannabis, of course, is one of the safest commodities in our environment, and they made it a criminal offense to possess it or grow it, and that's just about as ludicrous as can be. So there's a lot of truths out there that don't make us very happy, and for that we need some hope. If there was no hope, well, there'd be no reason to soldier on. We would just allow them to enslave us and restrict our access to this amazing plant and all the other things that go along with not being free. But there is hope that we can be freer in the future. We are already freer than we have been in the past in many ways, and hopefully that's the direction that we're moving in. And so, we try to find some reasons for hope, and I think we succeed at that most of the time. And, hope involves change, and change is the other thing that you need to make happen, because if you don't make it happen, if you just let it happen, then a lot of times you're not going to be moving in the direction that you want to be moving in, because there are other forces out there that we're up against that would like it to move in a direction that further exploits you and monopolizes the things that you need to use and all of those other things. So it's good to find some ways to make things change, and I think that that's what this show is all about. And that's probably why the majority of you are tuned in, is to, figure out how we can change things and what is the truths that are going on out there, and is there any good reasons for hope. First and foremost, Happy New Year. I've never been more sincere in saying that than I am this year. I didn't even understand that until this year. But, now as we've just experienced what for me is by far the worst year of my life with respect to world affairs and what's going on here with us as human beings on this planet, that I really am hopeful that we can have a much better year to come than we've just gone through. There has been some good things in the year that we've just gone through, for sure. We've learned a lot of things about ourselves as people, about those people that are in control of us. We've learned a lot about viruses. and learning is very, very important as we move forward in the future. If we have much of a future ahead of us, then it's important that we learn the lessons as we go. From us here in the cannabis community, there's been a number of positive movements, I would think, with respect to cannabis. The regulations, of course, are absolutely outrageous and unacceptable. This whole so-called legalization that we've been delivered here in Canada is nothing more than a hostile takeover of the cannabis community and all the industry that is behind all of that. We were lied to about access to medical cannabis with respect to legalization, and there's been a lot of things that weren't right. Well, a lot of that is starting to change. There is some movement on many different fronts. The cannabis regulations are looking like they're going to loosen up a little bit. They're wanting to include craft cannabis growers into the mix, and that's good, because that's some of the better cannabis. The growers have been doing it for a very long time, that do it on a smaller scale, that really care about what they're doing and bring their expertise to the table. Unfortunately, the structure that we're in right now with all the taxation and all the rest of it means that somebody should answer their phone. No, it means that the prices are extremely high and artificially kept high. And it's all about trying to capitalize on this commodity that's been in our environment for a long time, that has been traded at roughly $10 a gram since forever with prohibition, and that's just way too much for any plant that grows. If you look at what it actually costs to bring things to market. So there's a lot of change that has to happen yet with respect to government regulations, and we do see some movement on that. The big push for us here and for our movement is to get low barrier access to cannabis. That if the government wants to have their fancy stores with their high prices and all the rest of it, well, I guess they can do that, but they can't deny the people that don't have the funds, that are daily users, that need to have cannabis on a regular basis and just can't afford those artificially high prices. And they shouldn't have to, because those prices are artificially high. You can spend a lot of money producing cannabis. You can hire the best people and use all the expertise of decades and all the best equipment, and it is expensive to produce cannabis in that fashion. And those people will always be there doing that. But there also needs to be the availability of cannabis that's grown in cheaper ways. There's lots of inexpensive ways to produce cannabis, and that needs to be made available to people too. It's just not right that the government would decide that the only cannabis you can have is the expensive kind that they're producing and that they think is justified to charge exorbitant amounts of money for, and that nobody else who can provide similarly safe cannabis. There's not much in the way of dangerous cannabis out there, despite what your government tells you. It is one of the safest commodities in our environment. But that somebody else can't come along and provide safe, effective, good cannabis at lower prices, and that they're excluded from the marketplace. And that's just not right. That's where the problem is. That all the people that want to be taking part in providing cannabis to people should have the ability to do that without having to go through major issues at all. Because we're talking about cannabis here. We're talking about a plant that has been used for a very long time, for like centuries and centuries, through all the different cultures. And there's no problems associated with cannabis except the problems to do with making it illegal, with the lies that we're told about how it makes people insane and violent, and then it makes people lazy and stupid. And all of that is just made up reasons to try to keep the price high, to keep people from accessing it, to keep people using the other products that people have patents on and want to make money on. So all of this is what's been going on for a long time, and so it's good that we've made the progress that we have. But we're certainly not there yet, and we're hoping we can have some really good strides accomplished in 2021. There's a lot of court cases on the horizon where these things are being challenged. And with respect to what we're doing here, we, by the way, are here in Vancouver. This is being broadcast from the downtown east side in what was a low barrier access community cannabis store that we had for 4.5 months here. And I'm going to get a whole recap for you a little later in the show about how we got to there and what this was all about. But what we're trying to provide here is that low barrier access, which means inexpensive cannabis that is still very effective. It has to be high quality, good cannabis in all of its different forms, because people use cannabis in a variety of different forms, and we need to meet all of those needs of this particular community that we're in. And that goes for wherever you might be in the world, that there's a number of people that have a number of different ways that they need to consume cannabis or want to consume cannabis or use cannabis as topicals or edibles or concentrates or whatever. All of those things need to be available to people, and it needs to be available at inexpensive prices, and there's no justification for not allowing that, because people can bring to market cannabis that would be very high quality, effective cannabis at inexpensive prices, at low prices, certainly compared to what the rest of the market has been for all these decades of prohibition, and now for the last couple of years of so-called legalization, which didn't lower the price at all. It might have lowered it on the black market or the underground market a little bit, but as far as the legal market goes, the only available cannabis that's there is considerably even more expensive than what was available on the underground or in the underground marketplace for all the years leading up to legalization. So all of that is not right. All of that needs to change, and that's kind of the focus of our show. Has been since the beginning. We're here to talk about access to cannabis and as a focus, medical cannabis, because it's those people that really need cannabis that are the ones of concern. I mean, we all can use cannabis. It's all very beneficial in our lives. We all like it a lot. But there are some people that really need to use cannabis for their own well-being in very serious ways. And those people need to have proper access. That's what our concern was from the beginning. That was the niche that we managed to get happening to begin with Terry Parker Jr. and the original cases that gave people exemptions from Section 57 to be able to use cannabis for medical purposes. That had grown into numerous different court wins along the way that allowed for tens of thousands of people in Canada to get licenses to be able to use cannabis, to be able to grow cannabis or have it grown for them or purchase it through a government supply. All of that had been going on for this time. We've made some good strides along that, but really the focus has been on these medical cannabis patients, because people that are using it for medical purposes are not only using every day, which adds up. You start adding up how much it's costing you every day. Well, when you're using every day, that adds up a lot. but they're needing large amounts. I mean, the majority of people that are using it for medical purposes are dealing with large amounts of pain. They're dealing with serious medical issues, and the amount of cannabis that's ingested and needed to be taken to deal with those issues is considerably large. So those are the people that are of most concern, and they should be of most concern to all Canadians. They should be of most concern to the governments that are crafting the regulations to allow people to have access to cannabis now that it's so-called legal. That really the focus of legalization should have been on those people that are daily users and using for medical purposes and that need large amounts of cannabis to accomplish that. They should have the ability to procure that. And that's not what the government allowed. We were certainly told in the lead up to the election, where the Liberals came from non-opposition status. They were a third party in our Canadian legislature, and unprecedented that they took a majority government, and especially unprecedented that they could do that running on a platform of legalizing cannabis and legalizing it for recreational purposes, for adult use, not just for medical purposes. But certainly along the way, the medical community was asking about where their place was going to be in legalization, and they were assured that they were going to have good, full access, reasonable access to the cannabis that they would need. And that is not what happened. That's why we are still so concerned. That's why that's the focus of this show, is because this is the serious need that's not being met. And we're talking about sick and suffering people that in many cases are also dealing with poverty, because if you're sick and suffering, in lots of cases you can't provide income for yourself. And so these people are the weak amongst us that need our support. A society is judged by how well they look after the weakest amongst them. And the people that are sick and suffering should be our main concern. And they certainly should have been the main concern of legalizing this medicine that, started out being illegal, prohibited, demonized, criminalized, talked about as if it was some sort of a horrible thing that people would die from, and it must be horribly addictive, and all the rest of that. It went from those kind of narratives to the narrative that we had going on back then when Terry Parker Jr. went to court, and all the rest since then. The narrative of that this is medicine. The courts recognize that. The medical community recognizes that cannabis is medicine that works profoundly for many people. There's people with epilepsy, kids, that have serious forms of epilepsy that can only be helped by cannabis. And cannabis helps them in profound ways. And that's just one minor example of how cannabis helps people with all kinds of medical situations. So it's really unconscionable that legalization wouldn't have started with making sure that there was some reasonable, low barrier access to the cannabinoids that people need for medical purposes. It stopped being this demonized, horrible drug that was causing all this violence and problems in our community. It stopped being that decades ago now. We've known for the last 20 years, that, and so much so every day, all the new reports that come out show that cannabis is effective, and it's medicine, and it's not harmful, and it's not dangerous, and it helps with all of these different things. And we don't get any of the, we've determined that cannabis can cause this health effect in a bad way, or this bad thing over here, or that it's causing these health issues or these societal issues. None of that comes out. These are not the stories that we're hearing now. There's been a continuing progression of stories about how beneficial cannabis is, how effective it is, how much it is for medicine. We've got doctors all over this country that are prescribing cannabis for many serious medical conditions, and patients who will tell you that it's helping them get off of their prescription medicine that was harming them and causing them all kinds of problems, that they're regaining their life. There's so many testimonies out there that I've witnessed personally, people I know, that'll tell you that cannabis saved their life, that it gave them their life back. That they went from taking, this huge regimen of pills to deal with their issues that was causing them to be dopey, that was causing them to not be able to sleep properly, that was causing them not to be able to eat properly, and on and on and on the list goes of the side effects of these artificial medicines that the pharmaceutical company puts out there to try to mimic what food and herbs do for people. And so many people that I've met personally that have given their testimony about this, that have gotten their lives returned to them because they found out that cannabis can work for them, and they're on a regimen of edibles or suppositories or whatever it is that works, and they've not been managed to get off of the opioids and the other synthetic medicines and the pharmaceutical-based medicines that come with all of those other side effects. So cannabis is serious medicine. It's been medicine for a long time. For the last couple decades at least, we've recognized just how valuable it is as medicine. And yet here we are still restricting it, regulating it in ways that would indicate that it must be some sort of a dangerous commodity that needs to be tightly protected, and we got to keep it away from the kids, and there must be serious issues, because otherwise why would the government force people to have to only buy it through stores that they control, with all these layers of taxation that none of which makes any sense, in packaging that doesn't make any sense, in a form that the actual consumers of cannabis don't appreciate, because it's not good cannabis, it's not done in ways that we as cannabis consumers want to see. Why would the government roll out so-called legalization and yet leave behind or throw right under the bus the very people that needed that the most, the ones that were at the forefront of legalization to begin with? We showed that cannabis is medicine. We won all of these court cases. It was very clear that cannabis is not a dangerous drug to be feared and treated as if it was alcohol or some other scourge, that really it's something that should be embraced and made available to people. This is all past knowledge now. This jury's been in for a long time. There's no need to be scared of cannabis. What we need to be scared of is the over-regulation, the restrictions, the prohibitions, because that has brought with it a whole host of problems that all by themselves, even if cannabis was dangerous, the problems that come along with attempted prohibition, those other consequences, like, for example, not reducing the use of the drugs that they're trying to prohibit, etc., etc. 419, by the way, roll them if you got them. I got a minute. So we still need to do a big rethink on the whole cannabis file. We're very happy that there is some movement, as it seems, on the federal level to allow for some low barrier access, and we're going to get into that a little bit later on as well. So we'll see what 2021 brings. But 2020 was a year that we did begin to see a little more clearly what the motivations of our governments are, what the role is that they're playing and the role that they should be playing. So that's good. If we can use 2020 hindsight to see, the corruption that we're dealing with and to see, where freedom lies, then maybe that'll pave the way for a really good 2021 coming up here. So I think that brings us pretty close to 420. Every time at 420 on this show, we have a little break, and I'm joined in studio. This is our studio here. It's not really. We left the studio a while ago when we got the store. But Glenn Wells, good to see you, sir.
Hey, sir, how you doing?
Happy 420.
Happy 420. Go punch.
This is the day. Well, I don't normally hug you and kiss you anyway. We don't usually swap fluids here. But this is the day that Team Canada Juniors is facing the USA.
Yep, 6:30 Pacific time, 9:30
Another couple
Eastern.
hours from now. And gold medal looks pretty likely.
I think so. We got a #1 draft picks all over our team, right?
They have been
First
so
round
dominant.
ones. Yeah, I know. Eh?
The young man in goal, I mean, he's really making up for last year. I don't think he needed to make up for last year. He did. He was the goalie in the net, where in double overtime the Russians scored to win the game. But I don't think he needed to feel bad about that. But apparently he did. Yeah. And he felt so bad about it, he held that grudge for a year, and then he shut them out 5-0 the next time he saw them.
That's good.
He's actually
up for that. Yeah.
He's already eclipsing anything that any other goaltender has done in this tournament since its inception. So that's really amazing, and we'll see what he does tonight. If he pitches another shutout, well, holy smokes.
He'll make a junior world hockey history, I guess, eh?
Yeah, for sure. And many of those players that we're watching out there are going to be on NHL teams, future superstars in some cases, for sure.
Yeah, they were #1 draft picks, right? The whole team, I believe.
I think so, yeah.
That's what they've been
They
bragging
could all
about.
be captains wherever they play, and it bodes very well for Canadian hockey right now as it stands.
This could be like a prelude for the end of the new NHL 56 game. Canada against U.S. because we're all northern teams, right? We're only playing Canadian teams. And
so is that how that's going to shake out?
I don't know. I've been wondering about that because
I think I think it could be all U.S. teams. We'll see how the format is. But if there's 4 divisions, right? 3 U.S. divisions and the North Division.
Yeah.
I'd imagine that'd be divided into 2.
Yeah.
And I imagine if a Canadian team comes out of the one that they're in, then they'd be the Canadian U.S. But I think there's also probably a chance that division that they're going to play first.
Just have the Canadian, whoever wins the North Division, play the American winner.
Maybe they'll do
right?
that.
That'd be like right now. We don't know.
I know Gary's watching the show, Mr. Bettman. You heard it here first from Glenn.
Right here. This is what you want us to do. Yeah, it'd be like a juniors, but the seniors, I guess.
So what's new in your world?
CannaMatch has broke that 420 barrier.
Nice.
Yes. And then
and that's not 420 barrier. That's a 4200.
4200.
4200.
It was 420.
So if you didn't get a hookup this New Year's, I mean many of us didn't.
Yeah.
But I mean even to have a virtual toke with somebody like that, you got 360 days to join CannaMatch.ca and find yourself some fellow imbibers.
2 weeks ago, I got a report back from Eric Aronson. You know who he is?
Yes.
Eric?
Einerson.
Right? Yes.
Einerson,
yes.
Yep.
So apparently his friend went on to CannaMatch, and they have now got married to the lady that he met on CannaMatch.
That's
that's
cool.
Great.
That's
so
cool.
CannaMatch.ca is actually working.
Oh, I'm sure it works with 4,200 members.
That's my second story that I've known about, right?
Nice.
So, come check us out at CannaMatch.ca. You don't have to date them, you just have to smoke with them, right? Be friends, right?
Well,
and then see how it works out, right?
That aren't afraid of cannabis, that can get together and meet people.
It's cannabis people.
I mean, you probably don't even have to be a smoker of cannabis or an imbiber, but if you're cool with cannabis, if you're cool with cannabis and you wouldn't mind meeting somebody who's involved with cannabis, well.
And also you may have been dating an alcoholic who is very violent and you want to date somebody else who doesn't drink anymore.
There you go.
Cannabis right there, us cannabis people are very, very, very violent. You don't hear about the guy who smoked an ounce of weed and then beat the shit out of his wife, right? But you hear about the guy who drank 12 beers and beat the shit out of his wife, right? So
absolutely. Alcohol in the wrong hands, in the wrong dose can cause lots of problems. Cannabis, not so much.
No.
Put you on the couch, put you to sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, even the best sativas aren't going to get you so hyper that you get, like that.
Well, the best sativas should put you on the couch. I've had some Chernobyl that have done that. That's done that. Would expect to be all hyper and everything, but it was just so powerful that it's just like, whoa, So
the brain was racing, but the body was just laying there. I've had that lots of times.
I was surprised because I don't usually smoke.
If I smoke a sativa, at night before I go to bed, I can lay in bed there with my brain just going a mile a minute.
Oh, really? Right?
Yeah.
There's a natural herb called skull cap that is good for that. It will, if you take it before you go to bed, it will stop the brain from racing.
I just don't smoke the sativas before I go to bed.
Well, that's a good idea too. So you don't have to buy skull cap.
don't need to buy anything else. Just need to be careful of certain strains of cannabis. That make it easy to think, easy to think, and not so easy to stop thinking. So what else is going on?
Oh no, we should shout out to Jerry.
Well, Jerry, the medical recap. He's had a bit of a health issue. He's not going to be on the show this week because of it. So we wish a fast recovery to Jerry for sure.
Wish him a speedy recovery.
And what time is it? 4:25. We're early yet. We'll talk about some other things, but I'm going to do a recap of Jerry's situation and what's going on with all of that and why we dedicate that part of the show to him.
Well, it's definitely a good reason to dedicate the show to him,
Absolutely.
From what he's been going through and everything like that. So
it's been a tough 8 years, to say the least.
And now it's coming up,
I guess
April?
Not so much the first 4 years of the last 8 years, but the last 4 years have been very stressful for sure. And what do you got on there?
Mike Johnson said he's drinking mudslides and smoking sativas.
and I don't know what shirt that, like the mudslide probably goes like that, the sativa probably goes like that, so you're probably in like that.
He's meeting in the middle
in the middle somewhere there. That's what I typically do is I like to mix my cannabis profiles.
Yes.
Every cannabis strain has a different profile of different cannabinoids.
Oh yes, definitely, right?
And I overlap those as I like 4 or 5 different strains of if every strain is a strain I like, and I put that together, and it beats any of those by themselves.
I like just throwing them like like a chef. Just let's throw this in there and throw that in there and see what the hell it makes, right?
I heard someone say it's the end of the year. You got to gather up all the cannabis you can find laying around your house, throw it all together, mix it all up, and get it smoked before the January 1st.
But some of us like to save some of our old stuff, keep it in the jar because that was really good stuff. They want to break it out, right?
But it's a new year, you got to start fresh. No, some of those old vintage cannabis strains, and it does last a long time. I remember going to a court case. It was Carol Gwilt in preliminary proceedings against her for having the Decline Cafe. And I remember this woman getting up there and saying that she was the Vancouver Police Department's expert on cannabis.
She's been testing that person to cannabis.
She said that cannabis had a 6-month shelf life.
Yeah.
Period. That was it.
That was it, eh?
That was it. Once it was 6 months old, it had no more potency.
Wow.
That's what she said.
That's not true.
She said, no, that was not true.
That's
That
not
is
true.
not true.
That is not true, people.
I mean, if you put it in the windowsill
Yes.
during the summertime, there's probably no terps left. It probably will, powderize into almost nothing, and maybe there's not much there by the time you go to it. But if you keep it in a jar,
and you
burp your jar once in a while,
3 days, 3 days for 10 minutes.
Sure.
Yeah.
And even just in a jar, stuck away somewhere, out of the hot sun, it's gonna stay pretty good for a long time for sure. I do remember also that VPD expert saying something that I thought was pretty true, and I carried that with me, and it's helped to put perspective on some things. And that was that if you smoke a couple of grams of the really good cannabis that's available on the street, is how she said it, because this is going back quite a ways. She said that you've pretty much got it's as good as it's going to get for you.
Oh,
how
really?
she said it. Yeah,
Wow.
she said it was good. She said it was good. That's as good as it's going to get for you. And if you smoke any more, it's pretty much a waste of money.
Okay.
You're just throwing your money away. That 3rd gram isn't going to get you any higher or feeling any better.
No, maybe.
And I thought that was a good point that she made there, and there's a lot of truth to that too.
Yeah.
And it illustrates, when people are trying to use it to get off of opioids or to substitute the use of opioids, that the smoked cannabis really isn't enough for most people.
You need the edibles.
You need the edibles,
but you
because you can't smoke too much cannabis. You can't get to that level that you need to get to.
Yeah.
But with the edibles, you can get right to the point of comatose for days,
Yes.
and eating to the point where it's not good. Your head feels this big, and blah, blah, blah.
Her theory on that doesn't work with edibles. You said that 3rd gram that you're smoking is not going to get you higher, but that 3rd edible that you're eating would definitely get you higher, right?
I mean, she was only talking smoked cannabis, and that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
And that was the big difference, was for me understanding why cannabis edibles were able to get people through withdrawal and to substitute the use of these harder drugs, is because it's a different level that you can achieve.
And you can sleep through it. Because the most thing about withdrawal is being awake, going through your withdrawal, the pain.
If you can sleep through that,
that gives you that 8-hour head start.
Yeah.
And then your brain has not been 8 hours in pain, or say going through the withdrawal. So you need this, right? You've actually slept and got a little bit healthier. So yes.
And that's why going back 16 years to the herb school that we had, for 3.5 years, right in this neighborhood, the people that were using hard drugs would come and tell us that a couple of the good strong brownies that we had available was all they'd need to get through a night,
Yeah.
And so that was very key when this overdose epidemic started happening.
Yeah.
To understand that.
Wow, eh?
So that's that in a nutshell. That's why cannabis can be effective for helping people. For a while, like when we first came into this. I remember back then, 16 years ago, 2004, in August, when we opened the herb school there, that the attitude on the street about cannabis is that, that's nothing.
Yeah.
That does nothing. I mean, this, or smoking that pipe, But weed was very, it didn't do anything. And then because of Lady Marijuana's cakes and brownies that she would make, that we would have for people, it didn't take very long, and that's the stories that we were getting back from people. They'd come back repeatedly to get the brownies and the cakes, and they'd say to us, this will get us through.
Yeah.
This gets me through the night without having to do it. They'd say it changes the path.
Yeah, it does.
It changes the path.
It does,
They can stay at home. They can watch TV. They can sleep. And that's a whole different lifestyle than what's going on with the other drug. No jonesing, climbing the walls, got to go get something right now.
Yeah.
Can't go through 3, 4, 5, 6 hours without more. So that was key to that.
What's the best bud you've ever smoked? The one that really stands out, like I've got one that stands out in my head that I seen in the early 80s, right?
Michelle Rainey, may she rest in peace, what a wonderful soul. She developed a strain that worked for her called Afghani Bull Rider.
Oh, wow.
And as far as strong indicas go,
that was it for you,
man. And you could miss events.
I remember some Colombian...
Wake up on the couch a couple hours after the marijuana march. We had lots of people tell us that. Specifically that, because we were organizing the marijuana march from the herb school, and we had that particular strain available at that time. And we had some of our volunteers the next day go, slept right through it, man. I couldn't believe it. I smoked some of that bull rider. So we started really warning people about the bull rider. So yeah.
Wow, I remember some really nice Colombian gold. And the bud was actually yellow. And the guy had cured it in scotch and water. Oh, it was so tasty. The sugars came out of the scotch and were on the bud, and you smoked it. It was really sweet, and it was real gold-looking bud, right? Not green, not brown, not purple.
I had Acapulco gold that was gold and so tasty.
How about Maui Wowie? That was blue and red.
I went to Hawaii and got Maui Wowie. and the Maui Wowie was, it was kind of average.
Yeah.
It was tasty. It was nice. It had an island flavor to it. There were small buds,
Blue Hawaiian.
But I got some Kona Gold. The Kona Gold was out of this world. That might be the best I ever had. But there's a number too, because if I go back to those days and the exports or imports for us, the Thai stick was fantastic. The Cambodian was very, very tasty. There's so many nice flavors from the past. I wish they'd come back.
I think they will.
I hope so.
I was watching a guy in the Calgary Cannabis Club that has over 1,000 seeds, and he's about 70 years old, maybe 66. Right. So he's been collecting seeds for a long, long time. So I would think that gentleman would have some old strains there.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope that many of these old strains can be brought back and made available to people. That would be so awesome.
Would they be as strong? Because they keep telling us that the weed that we're growing today is way stronger than what we were smoking back there. Well, that's what they say, right? Yeah.
Certainly not true about Thai stick or Cambodian or these ones that we just talked about.
That, right? Now we can grow that.
The imported stuff. I mean, the big thing about that stuff is you can bring the seeds to a different environment and grow them, and you don't get the same result.
No.
Because those imports that were coming in from Jamaica and Cambodia and Colombia and those places, there's a particular combination of things in the water. The air is different. The soil is unique to those areas. There's something about each area that produces, the weed that it produces. I mean, that's why it's Jamaican. That's why it's Cambodian, because it's been growing there for generation after generation after generation in that environment with that soil and that all the rest of it, and that's what's produced by that. So when it's now reproduced somewhere else, I think you do lose some of because you're not getting and maybe generation after generation it would start to morph as well. It's a very changing plant. It's a very adaptable.
It's a weed, right?
They call it a weed.
It's a weed. Like Doug and Michelle knocked down their plant and left it in the soil, and that thing has started to grow again.
Oh, it's very hardy.
Yes, it is.
It's very hardy. I'm not sure what really defines a flower from a weed.
Yeah.
Plants we like and plants we don't like, pretty much.
Yeah, because even dandelions are weeds and they still flower.
But cannabis is an extremely ancient plant. It goes back so far. There's only about 5% of the ancient plants that are part of what's here right now. Most of the plant life that is existing right now is fairly recent, on the time scale of those types of things. And cannabis is one of the real ancient ones that has a long taproot that is originally wind pollinated and
wonder what the oldest seed is. Wonder who has it. Politician John.
Mother Earth. Mother Earth probably has in the frozen glaciers. There's probably seeds that were there when they were tropical zones or something like that, and the cannabis flourished.
Wow.
We'll excavate some piece of ice one day, and there will be some.
Isn't there supposed to be some cave in the States where they have all kinds of seeds stored?
There is a vault.
A vault, yes.
A vault.
So I wonder if they have any cannabis seeds in there.
They would probably have cannabis.
You think so?
I would think so.
Knowing that they know its benefit.
I think they know.
What the
I think they know what they got.
Do you think we have even an opioid addiction problem if they would have been truthful about cannabis? You think? I think if with any change of time, something would have changed.
Sure, I don't think we wouldn't be where we are now.
No.
If cannabis had been available and accepted in society, as it should have been. Absolutely, we'd be way better off.
The planet would be better off.
Opium is still a thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure heroin would have still been invented, and all of that stuff would have been there, and there's always people that go down all of those different paths.
Yeah.
That's what human beings do.
Yeah.
There's an addictive nature to the opioids because of how it interacts with the human body.
Yeah.
Mostly about how hard it is to get off of it once you've had that interaction going on for a while, and then the withdrawals that are difficult to get through that keeps people what we call addicted. But I think that there'd still be issues and problems with drug abuse no matter what. Mm-hmm. I just think that our society would have a lot less of it and a lot less of other issues to do with poverty and social interaction if cannabis had not been demonized and prohibited and restricted, for sure. It'd be a way better world.
All for a tree and some DuPont company or something, wasn't it?
All for the love of money.
Yeah, the love of greed.
This is about greed and the love of money. The love of money so much, and power. It's not about all money. It's
power,
also
right?
about power. The ability to have power over people in the environment that also drives the greed. That's also the thing that people lust over to the point where they're willing to just betray human ethics.
Yeah, ignore.
The ethics that we've been taught as human beings, we have in our heart, that we have in our beings, because that's just who we are and what we are, and that's what life is all about. We know what it's like to care for people when we have children, when we have people that we care about. Mm-hmm. And so the love of money, this greed, allows people to not see other people as people. Yeah. They see them only as how much money they can make off of them.
And that's sad,
I've said for a while, we have two different forms of ethics that we're living with here, and one of them is the human ethics of how we feel about each other, love and families and friends and our future and feelings and all the big beautiful F words that I find there. And the other is business ethics, where it's about, okay, how can I profit off of you? How can I minimize my losses? How can I, look after my own security? And all of that is business. And business is business, and business isn't about this person's family or their future or their feelings and things. It's about money, and you lose sight of those human ethics. And I think for me that's where we need a government. That's where we need to have some public servants that come along and just scrutinize a little bit the trade that's happening between people, the business ethics, and see whether or not those business ethics are violating human ethics. And they do in so many cases, the human rights that are just set aside because of business pursuits. And that's what's happened with cannabis prohibition from the beginning. It was never about concerned people who thought that, those weed smokers, they're dangerous. They're dangerous. I'm really scared about those weed smokers. We better get our police to go over there and disarm those people and maybe send them back where they came from, because it had a whole lot more to do with people being from somewhere else than it did about what they were smoking. But it was never about a real movement of dangerous things that happened because of consuming cannabis that led to any of the demonization of it. That was all made up lies. Mostly Harry Anslinger. Put in charge. He had been in charge of the alcohol prohibition side of things, and then when that ended,
he went after weed.
So the government could take over all the alcohol sales. Sound familiar? Then his whole department was going to be out of stuff to do. So they had to come up with this new thing. So he'd been going around, Harry Hansen, look him up. That's a really interesting tale about U.S. history and the prohibition of cannabis. Was this fella that was got a job because he married the niece of Andrew Mellon, who was one of the big tycoons of the day. So he got this job being in charge of the Prohibition of Alcohol Bureau. And then when that ended, now he's got to find something else to do. He's got all these prohees, the guys that were running around enforcing alcohol prohibition. They're going to be out of work. But for the years leading up to that, when he was putting on these public hall speaks about why they had to prohibit alcohol and why they had to do these things, he was asked about weed. And he would say, oh no, that's not a concern. But then, once alcohol became legal, controlled by government, and now, what's he going to do? Well, now it's the new demon. It's like he went around talking about this horrible new drug coming up from Mexico, driving people insane, and that's why they had to put all these efforts into making sure that nobody had that stuff, and even the smallest amount was dangerous. And it was such a conspiracy. We've gone over it before. Maybe lots of you out there, know, but maybe some of you don't. Just how this all really went down. That cannabis was pegged by Popular Mechanics to be the first $1 billion crop in America. That scared some other people that were producing some other things.
Yeah.
There was already patents happening on some of the stuff being produced by the Dow Chemical Company. There was nylon ropes. There was the Bayer Pharmaceutical Company with their replacements for what cannabis was one of the most used medicines up until that point.
Yeah.
And the Rockefellers with their fuel interests, and that's where alcohol prohibition came in, to protect the Rockefellers' fuel interests, because alcohol was a fuel that was going to compete with the fossil fuels, and that's why alcohol was prohibited in the first place.
Yeah.
13 years later, there's illegal stills all over the U.S. countrysides. All that liquor that's being produced is being consumed, not all of it, but a lot of it in vehicles, threatening the Rockefellers' monopoly on fossil fuels. So they're the ones who funded the temperance movement to go and lobby the government to end alcohol prohibition, to save the children, but really it was about saving their monopoly of fossil fuels. And then turning right away to making hemp illegal, because hemp is the best source of ethanol by far, 10 times more efficient than corn.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, I mean, that was a huge, big part of the conspiracy.
I didn't even know that.
The Rockefellers also were in a partnership with Bayer Pharmaceuticals. They'd come up with synthetic versions of the herbs that people had been using for years, and they demonized all of the different medicines the herbal medicines that were out there. Mostly through a report that they released called the Flexner Report, that talked about how the herbal schools and the herbal medicine outlets, there was drugstores, but they were herbal drugstores all over. That's what people relied on. That the Flexner Report came along and said that was more or less just voodoo medicine, that you couldn't get a standardized dose, using herbs, and that modern medicine had arrived, and now they had pills that they could stamp out of exactly the same dose in every one, and trained doctors, several years in university that would help you, with all of your health issues, and you wouldn't have to do a hit and miss with herbs that may or may not, but they had the right medicines, and all, modern medicine was here. And the Flexner Report really resulted in all of the funding that was going to the schools for herbal medicine and all of those industries. They all relied on funding. I mean, all these industries relied on funding. And the funding just really shifted from that point over onto the Rockefellers institutes for medicine that were attached to universities. And so now doctors emerged all in their white gowns with the whole array of different pills they had to choose from, and whatever was wrong, they had a pill for it.
Yeah.
And that's all part of the conspiracy. It's been going on for a very long time, but there was never any reason to prohibit cannabis that was real, that it was causing any problems. But the other big one was the media.
Yeah.
Back in those days, there was not magazine racks full of magazines.
No.
There was Time, Life, Maclean's, and not much more. And Reader's
National
Digest,
Geographic.
National Geographic. There was just a handful of magazines.
Yeah.
And people back there were, I dare say, a little more simple than these days. We know more about fake news, and we're maybe a little more savvy.
Yeah.
And back then, of course, if it was written down in a magazine, it was gospel. It was the truth, 100%. And William Randolph Hearst, who owned most of the big newspapers throughout North America, the United States, he was a big a tree owner. The Dow Chemical Company, friends of his, they were all these bigwigs hung together. They had figured out that you could use the waste from producing lumber from trees to make paper.
Yeah.
All the paper prior to that was made out of hemp, the good stuff.
Yeah.
And so William Randolph Hearst, he wanted to use his wood waste paper to replace the hemp paper in his newspapers, and he wanted everybody around in the country to start using the newspaper produced by trees instead of through hemp. He had also simultaneously, or synchronistically, lost a whole bunch of land to Mexico, where they reclaimed the Mexican border, and all of that was trees. And so he was really pissed at the Mexicans.
Yeah.
So he started writing stories in his newspaper. He had that kind of power, right? I mean, you got a newspaper, you got so much power.
Yeah.
So those dope smoking, Mexicans were on his target list, but also because there was a shift where people that were using alcohol could plead insanity, for committing serious crimes.
Because they were drunk.
Because they were drunk. And now there was this new crazy drug that the American government was going after, marijuana.
Yeah.
And the whole story was how violent it made people. And so William Randolph Hearst, he started attaching to every one of those stories that he could about violent acts, that there was some marijuana that was that was involved in that. So people were, smoked a joint and then went and killed his parents, and so stories like that, there's a huge volume of these stories that were produced by William Randolph Hearst in his newspapers that all demonize cannabis.
Yeah. And do you think that he knew that paper wouldn't last as long as the hemp paper was?
No, I don't think he knew or cared.
No, because the hemp paper is still around today, right? And we have old books that are still in great condition because of this hemp paper, but we have books that are made from that paper from a tree, and they're not as well off as
which just suits the needs of those selling paper.
Yeah,
you get to sell more paper, right?
Paper, exactly.
I mean, maybe he had those kind of thoughts. Maybe he recognized that it was inferior paper that would increase the demand for paper. Like 5 years later, you're going to need to replace those documents or whatever. Yeah. Maybe it was as sinister as that. I don't know. Did the Rockefellers recognize that by replacing cannabis in the pharmacopoeia, restricting it and criminalizing its possession even, did they realize that they were going to be substituting the use of cannabis with the use of these harmful pharmaceuticals, that they were going to be killing millions and millions of people in the process? Did they think about that? They might have recognized that there was going to be a lot of harm done. I don't know.
Or that they're just going to have side effects and then they'll need more pills for those side effects.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
The side effects.
Down the ride, right?
The real insidious thing with the pharmaceuticals, I mean, the motivation is not to cure people, for one thing. It's to get them to buy your product. Yeah. It's to make money on that product.
Just like the old guys with their elixirs.
They got such a scheme. I mean, they're brilliant as can be. I mean, in so many of these cases, these big companies, these big families that control these things, they're really brilliant about how they do it. With pharmaceuticals, they have side effects, harmful side effects, purposely built into the formulations, so that when the doctor says, this is the right medicine for you, it's going to mess your stomach up a little bit. It might cause your bowels to back up. You could get some headaches from it. There's a whole bunch of different things that could happen that aren't good for you. It's okay. We have other pills that'll look after that.
I know.
But the point is that when you get that stomach ache, when you get that headache, when you can't shit properly, the doctor told you the truth. So now you believe your doctor, you believe this is the right pill, and the belief in the pill, turns out, is so powerful that many people, even if the pill actually isn't doing anything for them, it could be just sugar pills, they're going to get the headache, they're going to get the stomach ache, they're going to get the relief from the symptoms. All that stuff happens because doctors' main tool is hypnosis, which most people don't realize as well. That bedside manner means putting you in the right mood to accept what it is that they say, and they know full well that if you believe what they say, you will experience what they say, and you will come back for more and believe that they're the right. It's a it's
a vicious circle.
It's a vicious circle, and the real issue at heart is did they realize? Do they know how much harm they're doing? That they're trading their souls for money. To live in a big fancy house and have a bank account that the 10 generations down the road won't be able to spend. They're trading all of that for their soul, because cannabis is the right medicine for most people, for most things, because we grew up with this plant and have an endocannabinoid system as evidence of that, and denying that to people and forcing them to have only these options, like our government's forcing us to have the options of alcohol and tobacco, but not cannabis. So now we've got a whole bunch of people that have serious health issues from alcohol, tobacco, that they wouldn't have because they'd have been choosing cannabis. Who wouldn't choose cannabis if you had that choice? So denying that choice is criminal. In the damage. And it might be criminal in that, did these people understand when they were there making all this happen just the damage that they were going to cause? Because that's the other side of being a criminal. Or was it just criminal negligence, or better yet, willful blindness, which is also, both of those are also crimes. But, maybe it was willful blindness.
The crime would be that they knew that it was going to kill a person faster, so the money that you're putting in for your old age pensions and stuff like that would eventually become theirs, because you're going to die and they're not going to pay out the pension to you.
That's pretty criminal.
That's
pretty criminal.
Right?
It's
so
pretty damn criminal.
Why not tell you to smoke cigarettes, which you know will give you cancer, or drink alcohol, which will affect your liver, your brain.
Exactly.
Right? right? So yeah, why not tell you to do that so that
And you find out that all of these things are cross-invested.
Yeah.
Like, they're gonna make money off of you dying early,
Yeah.
and getting
if you
cancer.
smoke cannabis, you're probably going to live to 100 maybe, and you're going to collect that pension. So we're not.
And then they hire lobbyists.
Yeah.
They have board meetings or backroom meetings, and they hire people to go and make sure that their needs are looked after, that their views are seen, and that people are encouraged by government policy to use this and not this. And in the case of cannabis, the government policy was out and out criminalization for anybody caught even in possession of small amounts
Do you think
of this here.
There would be room in the government for the people's lobbyists? Somebody who was not corrupted by the company, who would actually be a lobbyist for the people, say, hey, maybe this isn't so good. I know you're going to make a lot of money, but they should have a balance of having that company's lobbyist there, and maybe a lobbyist for the people too.
I thought the lobbyist for the people was supposed to be your member of parliament that you vote for and pay.
I guess so.
They're supposed to have an office with staff to do their due diligence and make sure that whatever the needs of their community are being met properly. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that we're supposed to have in that position to do that. Yeah. With respect to regulatory boards, where there's different industries that have boards of people that overlook and oversee how that is produced and how what regulations are put on that, they get corrupted all the time.
Yes.
And that's been going on since they started regulating meat products back in the 20s. And what happens is that the people that end up on these regulatory boards in many cases are people that were the leaders of the industry that they're trying to regulate. Mm-hmm. And they bring to the table all the actual needs and desires of the industry rather than the needs and the actual needs of the people that we're trying to protect with these regulatory boards. So we're not being properly served by the regulatory boards. And the answer to that is to have one more level of regulatory board that overlooks all the regulatory boards. Yeah.
So, there we go, another level, right?
Yeah, and it doesn't need to go beyond that. I mean, there could be checks and balances put in place for that regulatory board as to how they, scrutinize the other regulatory boards and what they're doing, and decide, is this right or is this wrong? It's all about right and wrong. So I think that board of people needs to be made up of non-industry representatives more than industry representatives, although they could be welcome on there as well. Yeah. Sure, they should have their views at the table, but they shouldn't be in charge. They shouldn't overwhelm the board and be the ones making the decisions. Yeah. They should be there just for balance and for understanding.
But even though some of those people would still be corrupted, because that's just the human spirit, right?
So because we know that,
good and bad, right? Yeah.
If anything, what we've learned in all this time leading up to 2020 gave us some hindsight now, where a lot of these things have become much more clear about who's in charge of who and what they think they can do and who can tell who what. All of these things have become clear. And I think that we need to really revisit our whole idea of democracy, to restructure it in ways that have as many mechanisms as we can in there to try to prevent that corruption.
From happening,
Right now we have basically no penalties for people that are corrupted within our governments and act accordingly. If they're caught and it's a real black and white trail of corruption, then there are things that we can do, but we seldom do them. Yeah. But they're sneakier than that, and the loopholes are big enough that they don't need to be overt about it. They don't need to have that black and white trail of corruption. But still it's corrupt, and we know it's corrupt. Yeah. And so because we now know that, we should really rethink it and stop it from happening. Again, because it's the corruption. We're right back to what you suggested to begin with. All of this poverty and drug addiction and the horrors that we're trying to deal with are fueled by the corruption of our governments, and especially with respect to prohibition, but it's corruption all through that's doing this. Yeah. It's serving the wrong people's interests. It's making a buck here and wasting $100 of our tax dollars over here, and most importantly, not worrying about the people harmed in that process. Mm-hmm. So all of that needs to change. There needs to be a real, properly identified structure of what it means to be a public servant, what their role is, and then proper punishments for when those are violated, and real good ways to catch them. Yeah.
Or enough to threaten them.
You do two things.
Not to want to do something.
You do two things. You don't make it easy in the first place, and you make it so that if they do it, there's serious consequences to it. Yeah. Right now, it's easy as could be to be corrupt in government. I mean, it's just like, holy shit! You gotta look what just happened in the BC legislature here over the last year and a half or
With
so.
the spending?
Yeah, with the spending by the Speaker of the, not the Speaker of the House, it was Daryl Pleckus who actually got in there and went, oh my God,
Yeah, they were
you know,
using
what the hell? There's alcohol in all these closets? Look at all that stack of alcohol.
The guy bought a wood splitter and he kept it on his
So I don't know how much it was worth, but it's worth well over $5,000, and then a trailer to go with it. And it was because he lived in the woods and he wanted to split lumber. And you know, he would take home the leftover alcohol because every government event is got lots of alcohol brought in, because that's what they do in Ottawa. That's what they do in the legislatures across Canada. Is that they serve alcohol at all these different things, that the functions that they have. Well, these guys were taken, or this one guy, I don't know if they were both involved, it's hard to say, only the one guy has been convicted of it, but it's widespread. And that's the whole point, is that, sure, one guy got convicted of it. It was hard to convict him because it's easy to be sneaky, it's easy to get these things, it's hard to prove these things, that's why they do it. And in fact, maybe, we've yet to really figure this out, maybe there's no real solid rules against what they were doing.
Yeah.
Like, we've got such a loose legislature here that, you know, the people in those positions, they can just do what they want, and there's really not much rules against it. You know? We need to have rules against this stuff.
Yeah.
You know, those are the mechanisms that I'm talking about. We need rules against this stuff.
Yeah.
We need to say, hey, look, guess what we figured out? These guys can take serious advantage of the public's money, our money. They can take serious advantage of that in this way, so let's put a spotlight on that, and let's close that loophole up, and let's see if there's any other places where that sort of stuff can be going on, and let's just stop this from happening. If you make it easy, you attract people that will take advantage of that, and they're not the people you want in those positions. We need people who give a shit about the public's money. They care about it. They care that the prestige and the currency of their job is how they feel about themselves, how they think that they're being perceived as being protectors of the public purse, of the protectors of the public's rights. That's the person I want in that job.
Almost like small level governments instead of big level federal government. So it's your area. So if you live in New York, you have the government of New York, who's only going to take care of New York. So that you're taking care of all your people. You have the concentration on the people. So then if you live in Buffalo,
and perhaps a federal government that would have some capacity to at least make sure that these other smaller governments aren't out of control. Because governments can get out of control, and that should be the role of the federal government, is that these other, because right now, the way it is in Canada, is you go into a municipality, you have no idea what bylaws you are up against. They can have rules and bylaws that you would never guess. They are not posted. You could look it up, you know, but most people don't. You don't think to do that. But I mean, it gets really stupid and oppressive in some of these jurisdictions.
For example, Saskatoon, you cannot smoke a joint while you're walking down the street. But you can here in British Columbia, no problem, when you're in Vancouver. So there's some real weird...
Oh, there's some weird ones.
Quebec, you cannot grow plants.
You're going to get me going.
Well, you brought it up.
Nelson might be one of the worst. On Baker Street, on their main street and their other main street, there's no singing or playing of any sort of music. There's no rollerblading or skateboarding at all. There's no dogs allowed. You can't walk your dog on Baker Street in Nelson. Can you imagine that public servants think they have that kind of power? There needs to be an overseeing government body, the federal government, that says, no, these are rules. You can't fuck with people's rights. Like here, people can walk their fucking dog. If your problem is dog shit, well, you can make people clean up their dog shit. That's an okay rule to have. But you can't say, and you can't tell somebody they can't sing on a corner. If the same guy is singing on the corner and he can't flip and sing, and he's singing loud enough to bother people day after day, then maybe you can make a bylaw to deal with that particular circumstance. But somebody sitting on a sidewalk strumming some music and singing a little song, people throwing money in his hat or his guitar case, you know, that's not something for a public servant to come along and stick their nose in and hurt this guy, and probably hurt all those people that threw money in the case who did it because they like hearing that music when they walk down the street. I know I do.
Something different.
It's beautiful.
It is.
So governments have to have boundaries, and maybe it's a federal body that would, you know, set those boundaries for these smaller governments. But absolutely, it's on a municipal basis of these people that are really interacting with you. We never get to see the Prime Minister. Hell, I never get to see John Horgan. I met both those guys before they were in those positions.
Yeah.
But, try to get at them now. Pretty hard to do. But you can see your mayor.
Yeah.
Your mayor sees regular people regularly. They wouldn't respond to my asks for a meeting with him. But, I'm not.
Come on, Mr.
I guess I'm not.
Stewart.
Yes, I've been asking you, Mr. Stewart. I know you're watching the show. I've been asking you since before you were mayor, like the day before the election. I figured you were going to get in, and I sent you an email and said, "Give me a meeting. We need to talk."
Come on down and have you be here. Yeah.
Come and see what we're doing, sir, because it's a little rough around the edges in this particular neighborhood, but we're doing what needs to be done to suit the needs here. And we need your help. We need the help of all of the politicians and all the people right now.
Decriminalization of the drugs letter that he's
got some good ideas.
He's got some good ideas.
But,
and even Trudeau said it there during his end of the year meeting that BC has led the way and making these new things happen.
That's
he
true.
said BC was the first place to have an insight place. Now we have them all across the country.
Yeah.
He said BC has been the one who's been leading the way. So now that he's written that letter, the Prime Minister should let him continue to lead the way and show how it can be done across Canada.
And Mr. Kinney should come and talk to us.
Yes.
He should come and talk to us before he talks to Justin.
Yes. Or maybe both at the same time.
Because they don't come down here.
No.
I don't know if they're reading the reports that we're putting out about what's going on here. There are the reports from Dr. Malloy about our program, where he came and studied the effectiveness of our program, and those are great, and they've probably had some, knowledge of those reports. But, they don't come down here. We don't get anybody from government of any level at all to come down and see what we're doing here. Nobody's come and said, "Hi, I'm your local representative," and,
Not even
like Shane Simpson never came by, Jenny Kwan's never come by. No. To their benefit, or to their credit, they did lobby on our behalf, both of those people, to the federal government for us to be able to have our low barrier access store. So that's fine, but they don't come down here. They do not come down here.
It would have to be probably like those court people that have their security guard walk them down the street every time. If they came down here, they'd have to have a bunch of security.
Sure, well that's fine. Bring security
right?
if that's what you feel, for sure. But come down and see what's going on here, and you would have no choice but to support our efforts, and certainly would not be fighting against them.
They're just too comfortable where they are. They don't need to see the bad stuff, so they don't want to.
And the corruption comes in because they're comfortable where they are.
Exactly.
Because they're where they are, because they're serving the interests of the people that want their interests protected. Yeah. Like the people that have cannabis stores and are paying the city $30,000 plus just for the 1-year license on top of the fees they're paying to the provincial government. And who knows what else is going on with those big licensed producers who are supplying those stores, and how much contributions to government they're making. But you know that they are, it's part of business. So all of this is part of the corruption that's coming in here, where they have to protect the interests of those people that are paying $30,000 a year, or the licensed producers who are paying considerably more than that to have their licenses. The governments now have to protect the interests of those people at the expense of the rights of the people that they're supposed to be serving.
Vancouver never protected the people who had already paid for their license before legalization here in the city. They let them all go down.
Well, that's not completely accurate.
Or something like that.
No, they put in their regulation that included a $30,000 licensing fee before we had legalization in Canada. But they were also informed at that time that they were going to have to comply with the provincial regulations and the federal regulations with respect to running a cannabis store. Yeah. And so the onus was on them to apply and go through all of that to stay open.
Because I remember the rules came in about schools with BC Cannabis Compassion Club. I remember being close to schools, and then they made a licensing fee to have your store.
They brought in a whole host of regulations.
When the federal came in, that was it. They wiped them all out.
No. When the federal regulations came in, those stores were still subject to all of Vancouver's regulations to do with cannabis, and that includes the 300 meter limit on how close you can be to recreation centers and schools and other cannabis stores. There's a whole host of those regulations that they brought in that are unique to Vancouver, that are still in play and still having to be obeyed. But there's other regulations, like having a provincial license, complying with all federal regulations, Those things are also part of that mix. But Vancouver, and this is what I mean, every municipality you go into in Canada can have their own set of rules with respect to cannabis within certain boundaries.
Parameters,
And so in that case, although I disagree with the boundaries,
but we're working
in that case, this is the federal government saying, sure, as a city, you can have your own little rules about cannabis that you want, but they can't exceed this, and they have to be at least this, and so there's that going on there. But I mean, Surrey, they've decided they don't want any cannabis stores, and that's the same in a lot of municipalities across Canada. That they've just decided the people in Surrey don't deserve to have that option.
Places that are dry towns too, where they
dry towns where they have no alcohol as well.
That's
There's
allowed,
a whole
right?
bunch of different fucking rules in these towns,
that's
man,
the
in these
balance
municipalities.
Yeah.
So you never really know, and some of that's okay, and some of it's not. You know, it's not okay to have a dry town.
No.
It's not okay to have no cannabis stores in your town. People are free. Canadians get to choose what they want. It's not up to a government. I mean, a government gets into power because they get the majority of the vote. So whatever that vote is, whatever that majority is, that's a percentage of the people in their community. Not everybody voted, especially in municipal elections. Not everybody votes at all. So only a small percentage of the people in your community vote at all. Of those, it's broken up into the different parties that attracted votes. Somebody gets the majority of that small percentage. That's a pretty small amount of people to be able to give the power to that municipality, to be able to dictate things to the other majority of people that didn't vote them in. And even beyond that, these people get into power, they get voted in, and they don't do what they said they were going to do anyway. You know?
They just
and they think they can do fucking anything they want. And they pretty much can.
Yeah.
And it's not okay when it's not okay.
Yeah.
It's okay when it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But in so many cases, it's not the right thing to do. And they don't get to have that power over people. But they do. Yeah. Because that's the structure of our dumb-ocracy here.
Yeah.
You might remember, and in fact, I probably brought it up with you before too, because it's bothered me since it happened. 2 municipal elections ago, so maybe 3 years ago, there was all this media coverage of a woman, an Asian woman in, I think, Coquitlam, or no, Burnaby, who wanted to be the mayor.
Yeah.
And if she got to be mayor, there'd be no public signs of affection allowed in her municipality.
Oh, wow.
No hugging, no kissing, which is fine for COVID, but this is 3 years ago. No holding hands, or whatever else might be a sign of affection. I mean, maybe just a little wink there, you know?
Okay, 50 bucks, you just
roll your tongue a little bit, you know? See. You know, maybe you can't say out loud, hey baby, you want to go get a drink?
Yeah, or whistle at somebody.
Or whistle at somebody. I mean, this is ludicrous and stupid as fucking hell. No fucking public servant gets to tell people they can't do that. But the media didn't pick up on that part of the story.
You know what ruined whistling at girls? Walkmans.
Oh yeah?
Well, because now they all have buds in your ear, they're not going to hear you anymore, right? I've seen so many pretty girls that I would like to whistle at while I'm driving down the street, but what do they got? They got earbuds in your ears. They're not going to hear you anymore.
That's right.
You can't say, hey, you look good today, because they're not going to hear you. Right? You know,
and some of that's on purpose.
You think so?
Oh, I know so.
Yeah, eh?
Some of it they don't want to be whistled at or
no, I know that. That's the balance of things.
Yeah,
but, you know,
and they have that ability to do that.
I think
Walkmans was a beautiful way for people to be able to exercise their right to not be whistled at if they don't want.
Yes.
You know, put your Walkman on, sit on the bus. You don't have to talk to nobody. You don't have to have somebody talk to you. You know, that's a great thing. I'm in favor of all that kind of stuff. You know, government's coming along and banning Walkmans because you need to be able to be whistled at. I mean,
but I was going on the lines of video killed the radio star, right? So Walkman's killed that part of society too, you know.
And I'm glad it's a personal sound system because I don't always want to hear people's music.
No, and then you don't want to hear anybody's conversation while you're sitting on the bus too. That's right. So then you can listen to your own music, be in your own head, right?
But the point is that we need to reset how we think about public servants and what they can and cannot do for us. Yeah. Because most of the problems in our society, especially these big problems,
before we got there, though.
I don't think so.
You don't think that
resetting
would bring on some chaos that we would not be able to handle for a little bit?
I think that the structure's already there. They've just exploited it and twisted it and perverted it. But in reality, I think we're supposed to have public servants.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be servants of individual rights. I think that we've developed a common law system that we've set aside here in Canada for the rule of law, unfortunately. But common law has over centuries developed ways that are semi-fair and just in how things are dealt with, and that could be improved. It needs to be applied to public servants. We can make them, we can limit their powers, and that's where the chaos comes. We have to get the people that we elect into power to put in legislation that would limit the powers of themselves and future governments. And they want the opposite. They want more power. They want to be able to pay back the corporate interests that help get them into those positions of power. They don't want that. So that's the real tough part. But if we could get that happening, then we could make them accountable. We could make public servants accountable fairly easy, because we could just undo all that which they've done to make themselves not accountable.
And do you think maybe if the public servant lived like we did, they would be more grounded instead of living in a nice...
How do you live?
Well, like in a basement suite. You know, not a 5-room home,
I'm not
3
asking
bedrooms and stuff like
I'm
that.
not denying anybody.
I'm just saying they would be maybe more grounded because they're at the level of not being in high society sort of thing.
That's all up to the individual.
I don't know.
First floor.
All up to the individual. I wouldn't exclude people that have done well for themselves or their families have provided over generations or anything like that. I think we need good people, and they just need to be good people with good ethics, with human ethics, that understand business ethics, and recognize that their role as a public servant is to protect the individual Canadian person from the corporate, desire to manipulate and monopolize and exploit. Because that's what business will do. If business is allowed to do what it's allowed to do, it will maximize its profits at the expense of its workers and at the expense of its consumers. That's just what business does. Doesn't really have much choice. That's the name of that game. And that's okay, as long as it's tempered, as long as it's bounded, as long as there's an oversight and regulations that don't allow for child labor, for massive upping of prices when they have a monopoly on things. All these things that business does, if it can, that we all know just aren't right. They don't fit with human ethics. It wouldn't be done by the local grocer down the street that knows everybody in the community, that is providing them with what they need and cares about their individual needs. The corporate structure has moved so far beyond that family-run community business of people that interact with and understand their role to these corporate giants that have huge departments where policy is made. And policy is always about maximizing profits. It's about, money. People are not people, people are numbers. People are how much can you get out of them, how much can you charge them, how much can you exploit them, what can you get away with, how can we not pay for things we're responsible for, how can we get away with doing shit that's going to hurt the environment. All these things that business will do because business will do if it's allowed to do, because it's all about just making money today. That stuff needs to be tempered and regulated. That's what the role of public servants is supposed to be here in our world. Provide us with the right information and protect us from the forces that would harm us. And the corporate world harms us all the time and is largely responsible for the poverty, for the suffering, for the low wages, for the high costs, for all of this that's going, the pharmaceutical corporate structure, that industrial complex of profit making is so responsible for not having cannabis as an option, for having all of the problems of drug abuse that we're dealing with out here.
Because of that,
all because of that.
It's like my grandma would say, they got too big for their britches.
Exactly. There needs to be a point where they're not allowed to just be such a huge non-caring bully. If they have to be forced, and they do have to be forced to pay proper wages, to look after the environment, to care about the consumer, then that's what has to happen. They might not have to be forced if they did it voluntarily. And in the future, maybe business will evolve to the place where they recognize that being respectful of human rights and looking after the needs of their environment and their community is actually way better business, than what we've got going on right now, where it's cut corners everywhere you can. It's farm out the labor to places where you can get away with pretty much slave labor. It's all these other things that they do because they can, because that's just what business does when it wants to maximize profits. But maximizing profits is not always the best way to run a business.
No.
And even there,
You gotta care about
you
where
know,
the money's
if some
coming
other
from.
corporate giant comes along that actually cares about the environment and cares about their consumers, they're going to take market share away from those corporations that don't.
Yeah.
And eventually, probably, hopefully, they will evolve down the road to where even the big corporations recognize that it's caring about their individual consumers and their individual employee and where that source is coming from and whether the environment's being harmed that are the corporations of the future.
Yeah.
And that can happen if we get governments in place that put in proper regulations to protect from that sort of thing going on. You know, we'll get them to comply forcefully through governments that are there to protect us and make sure that that happens. It gives us a voice. Yeah. Because the consumer doesn't have much of a voice in comparison to the big corporation. The corporation's got all the leverage. Yeah. And if they can monopolize the marketplace, if there's commodities that you need or everybody wants and they control it, and they can charge whatever the fuck they want for it, they can have all the corruption. So if the government doesn't allow for that, and proper competition in the marketplace, all those things is what the role of government is supposed to be.
And the government got rid of the competition, so now they can charge $15 a gram or $85 an eighth.
Well, that's what they're doing.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Then this is the biggest way to expose this whole thing. That is in a nutshell exactly what we're talking about.
Exactly.
You want to see government corruption? Have a look at how they so-called legalized cannabis. That is just so corrupt. So, what should we do now?
How's the CSP doing?
Well, no, I want to talk a little bit about Jerry Martin
Yes,
first.
you want to talk about Jerry.
And I think we'll still do that in here. I'll take you out to the RV in a little while. It's really, really miserable out there. It's dark and stormy and wet. And
I'm going to head out and go get our table for the game. So we will see you down there.
It's not that time
yet. No, we've got an hour to game's time.
I'm better if I talk to somebody.
Okay.
I don't listen very well.
Problem.
You don't get to say much.
All right.
But I got lots to say.
Keep talking to me then.
As always.
Yeah, you don't mind if we smoke.
I'll let you have the odd word here.
How about I smoke another joint?
No way, we don't smoke weed on this show. What do you think, this is pot TV or something?
Yeah, the host lets you
that
smoke
stuff should be illegal.
There we go.
Oh man, are you gonna get violent and insane on me after you smoke that shit?
Some of that devil's lettuce.
And just fall asleep in the chair?
The devil's lettuce.
Not that either, Lies, and more fucking lies.
Debauchery.
Oh my god.
Debauchery. Oh, what a word. Words that we don't say anymore, right? Cool cat. Hip. Hip, you know? Yeah.
Exactly.
There's a whole bunch of things that we don't say anymore.
I want more too.
You gotta have some more too. What the hell?
Some more too. So yeah, usually typically...
It's 5:20. What the hell?
We're doing good.
It's 4:20 somewhere.
Oh yeah, it certainly is.
Yeah.
It's out in the Pacific Ocean somewhere, but it's 4:20 out there. On cruise ships or boats. No, there's no cruise ships anymore.
I have a meeting at 6.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay, well,
but don't let me cut your thoughts short.
That's fine. We got a fair bit of time. We won't be too long. But I did want to use this particular... I got this going on. I can do that. I guess I'll do that. Being the first show of the year, I did want to use it a little bit to recap some of the things that we've been following on the show and what the show's been about. And since the beginning, we've had what we call the Martin Medical Moment, named after Jerry Martin, and because he kind of is the poster boy for how legalization is not right with respect to medical access to cannabis. And as I said off the top of the show, that's really the focus of the show, because that's really the number one problem that's going on here. It's the sick and suffering people not getting access to cannabis, and Jerry was at the forefront of the movement to make that happen. Jerry Martin was a fellow who had a tough upbringing, a tough life. I don't know if his upbringing was tough, but his life turned out to be a little bit tough as he found himself here in Vancouver and messed up with hard substances and living the gang life a little bit, and not in a happy place in his life, hitting rock bottom on a couple of occasions, and at some point deciding that enough was enough due to circumstance, and that he wanted to go and clean himself up, straighten out his life, and give back. And so he went back to his home, to his roots in Whitewood, Saskatchewan.
He did.
And he opened up a couple of businesses there and started a few businesses there. And over the course of a couple of years, had been helping some people get access to cannabis. And it was suggested to him that maybe he could open a medical cannabis dispensary. that it was much needed,
Yeah.
and he was convinced to do that. And so he did do that. He kept to the strictest of protocols with
Yes,
respect
he
to how he was giving access to people. He wanted to be, he didn't want to be raided for one thing. And in small town Saskatchewan, you got to be very careful how you open a store
Yes.
that's selling cannabis
Yeah.
pre-legalization. And so he was following the guidelines set out by Philippe Lucas and Riel Kapler with the BC Compassion Club Society. That was the set of guidelines that all the compassion clubs and all the dispensaries were using in the early days of dispensaries, and still many do today, or it's evolved into other forms. But he was following all of that, where you had to have a doctor to confirm your diagnosis and all the rest of it. And so legalization happens. His goal was to be included in the mainstream of business and to have his dispensary made legal. But legalization didn't include medical dispensaries. Trudeau lied about that.
Yep.
And Jerry found himself on the other side of an order by Health Canada to cease and desist.
Yep.
We covered in previous episodes on the show about just
Couldn't do that.
that's not something you can
Nope.
do as a caring
like
human
you.
being. You're
You can't
using
do
human
either.
ethics.
Yeah.
You know, there's that battle again between human ethics and
There may be
business
some who
ethics.
maybe they'll do it, but you or Jerry are not those people.
I never met a dispensary owner who had his dispensary more than 6 months
Be able to turn
that would be able to do that. I met many dispensary owners that getting into the business of running a dispensary would have that attitude to begin with. It was
Yeah.
all about business. They saw a lucrative business they could get into, that's why they did it. But you get into that business for 6 months,
Yeah.
and you've been helping people. That 6 months is a fairly long length of time. You get to know some of your customers
Get to tell
over
your
that length of
stories
time,
and how it's
and they
happening.
tell you their stories,
Yeah.
and they bring tears to your eyes, and
Yeah.
they tingles up your spine sometimes, and anger, from the depths of your core. All of these things are emotions that you go through when you run a medical cannabis dispensary, as
Yeah.
you hear these stories and meet these people.
Even if you don't, like me, I have a neighbor that didn't really use cannabis very much. Now she's using edibles, and she's told her friends about it, and now they're using edibles too. And they're 60s and 70s years of age. But it's amazing how they've now realized that this is actually helping. There's a gentleman that this lady knows that has a big, huge sore on the side of his leg. It's been there for years, will not heal, wasn't able to sleep or anything. I have access to 100 milligram worms. She gave him one of those worms. He slept for 10 hours. Now he buys a bag of worms every month so that he can sleep. So now we give him the cream to see if it'll help heal his sore. Right? So he's got something that's wrong with this. Again, I guess it's something like the flesh
There are
eating
so
thing.
many people
But yeah,
that'll
but
tell
it's
you.
amazing, not even owning a store, seeing how just my neighbor has infected or helped 3 other people with what I gave her, right?
So you can imagine being a dispensary owner.
Yeah.
And having this go
all
on
those
all
stories.
day, every day,
Yeah.
of meeting these people who are telling you, "Oh my God, I can finally sleep. Oh my God, my pain is gone. Oh my,
Oh my God, no withdrawals tonight.
my child is no longer seizing."
Yeah.
All of these stories that you get there as a dispensary owner. He was 4 years
Yeah.
in a small town with 1,000 members,
So then you all
and the government's telling him to stop doing what he's doing. He had been illegal for all of that time to begin with.
Yeah.
He's always been in counter to the law. He was trying to do it like we were doing it here, that we were getting away with here, that the courts seemed to be supporting, that looked like it might fly. He was trying to do it right.
Yeah.
But he was still subject to a police raid at any moment through all those first 4 years. So now it's 4 years later. We got a government in power now that ran on a platform of legalization.
Ooh, fake legal.
You think you're going to be included in the new marketplace of having a dispensary,
Yeah.
and instead you get a letter saying cease and desist your operations.
Yeah.
Well, he couldn't do it.
No.
Nobody could do that. That's a cruel and unusual request by the government for someone who's helping 1,000 people
And
to
trying
stop
to live
helping
in the
them.
same town too afterwards.
Yeah. Impossible.
Yeah, impossible. Exactly.
Impossible.
Yeah.
That any prosecutor out there could think for a moment that's something that Jerry could have done in all good conscience.
No.
Not a fucking chance.
No.
So he continued on
Yep.
with a cloud over his head, and sure enough, if they don't come and put him in handcuffs,
Yeah.
arrest him, And not just that, they seized all of his properties.
Yeah.
He had other businesses.
Cars.
Jerry's a smart guy.
Yeah.
He had other businesses, he had other incomes. They took all his stuff. They took his house, they took his cars, they took his bank account.
Well, to where he's living in a basement suite. In
So
Vancouver.
now, Jerry, a compassionate, sensitive, emotional guy,
Yeah.
who had been living on top of the world, knowing that he was, even in the face of danger, helping 1,000 people have better lives.
Yeah.
And now his government is going to call him a criminal, treat him like a criminal, stop him from helping these people, and he knows it's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
He knows that the government's not right and he was just doing bad things,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
How do you deal with something like that? I really don't know. I mean, I've watched Jerry try to deal with it for all the time that
It's
this
really
has
a
been
toll
going
on
on.
him. Yes.
And it's taken a huge toll, and it's been
Yes,
very
yes.
difficult. And I don't blame him for a moment of it.
No.
Knowing what I know about him as a person
Yeah.
and the journey that he's been on here,
Oh.
it's now been over 4 fucking years.
I
Sorry,
think
Aunt
it
Barbie.
is. Yeah.
I know you're probably watching and you don't like me swearing.
Yeah.
But you know, this stuff is so serious. It's so
It's so
so
ridiculous.
important that, you know, it requires strong language to
Yeah.
describe what's going on here.
Yeah.
And so there's just, now he's had over 4 years, he's had over 40 court appearances. They've threatened him numerous times. They've given him offers of deals that involve prison time,
Yeah.
of forfeiting all of his belongings, and all these things, you know, make it go away by pleading guilty, and we'll just give you this big a fine and you only do this much. He doesn't deserve to do any time.
Or
He doesn't
any
deserve
time.
any of the last 4 years.
No.
The man deserves a medal. And if you looked at the way he operated his business, he gave everything he could to the community.
Yeah.
He gave back to his activist community, including myself, and he gave back to his community in the form of all kinds of things. A fire truck, a resort for kids to go to, a kids camp that he paid for, and on and on.
He inspired
and on.
other people too.
Oh my God, did he
Like
ever?
That guy in Windsor and Leo Lasur, he did the same thing, but he did it by if you brought food for the food bank, he'd give you $1,000. Right, so
Jerry did tons of-
he inspired
he
that
was-
gentleman to do the same thing.
He
yes.
was the best community citizen they could have asked
Yeah,
for.
yeah.
There's not a single victim that ever would step forward and say, I was harmed by
No,
this man.
no.
There's 1,000+ people more than that that'll step forward and say, he helped me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is just such a travesty of justice, a huge, abominable waste of our tax dollars. There's now a second prosecutor, and it's been 4 years,
Yeah.
40+ court appearances. I don't know what each one of those costs, but to have a judge and a stenographer and a sheriff and the lights on in the room and everything else costs us a lot of money.
Yeah.
That prosecutor, I don't know how many hours he billed, but you can just imagine,
Yeah.
you know, working on the file for 3.5 years, his billing to us taxpayers of his costs on trying to make Jerry a criminal has got to be humongous.
Yeah.
Now there's a new prosecutor, you know, got to get up to speed and spend a lot of hours on the case and, you know, billing more and more time and more court appearances. It's always been a constitutional challenge.
Yeah.
Although we've had lawyers to pay. I mean, Jerry's had to sell what they didn't seize to pay
Yeah.
lawyers. He didn't get any of the money.
Yeah.
We've had fundraisers to raise money to pay lawyers.
Yeah.
The lawyers' fees have had to increase constantly because it's been 4 years. I mean, they keep putting in hours themselves.
And
I'm sure many unbilled hours have been put towards this case. Paul Lewin's a good man. He's been helping Jerry, but, you know, Jerry had other lawyers before that just, you know, had to give up because it's too tough a case and Jerry's a tough client and, you know, all of this stuff. Well, holy smokes, this is just terrible what's been going on.
Let's hope in April that he gets some good news.
He's got a court case coming up. He's joined forces with some other dispensary owners that are also facing similar charges and in part of his constitutional challenge. His constitutional challenge is to allow for people to have storefront access. It's saying that many people can't order from home.
No.
They can't, they don't have a credit card. Some people don't even have a home. Many people are too poor to go through that system. They need a storefront dispensary that can handle them in compassionate ways, which storefront medical dispensaries do.
Yeah.
There's a whole lots of other facets to it, but it's mostly about the people facing barriers.
Yeah.
And those are the people that are in more trouble. Those are back to the main theme of the show today, about the ones that are really that we're concerned about. The reason I have a show is the sick and suffering poor people of Canada. The ones that we should be helping to protect. The ones I don't mind my tax dollars going to help.
And
you know, sick, suffering, poor people, I don't mind helping. I want those people helped.
Yeah.
And that's what Jerry was doing.
Yeah.
That's what this was all about.
And where you have a storefront, you're allowed for human compassion because you have a human meeting a human. Whereas
Exactly.
it's on the computer, it's just words and electronic
big time.
click, and that's it. There's no compassion, no hearing the story of how this has helped that person or anything, because it's just a click now, right? Yeah.
There's knowledge online. I mean, you can go online and you can find out
you
what,
don't know about
you know,
if you're reading the
generally
right stuff.
speaking, and I mean, these terms are
Yeah.
probably going to evolve over the not too distant future now with science being able to explore the plant. But you know, there is the understanding of indica and sativa. I know that there's, you know, some real connoisseurs or real, you know, people understand their stuff out there. They'll tell you that maybe those aren't what we think they are. You know, but there's all of those kind of things that are involved in this. Now we can have science to explore all this stuff. Now people can understand these things. Prior to this, you know, it was all hit and miss. But even so, what you want is an expert. What you want is somebody there that can condense that information for you, that's gone through the trouble of reading all the stuff that's online. They've probably been trained, because any medical cannabis dispensary should have their staff go through, you know, different training, different courses, things like that. Yeah. You want to have a place where you can get exactly what you're saying, that personal care, that knowledgeable person, that range of products at prices that are affordable.
Yeah.
Though that needs to be something in Canada here. That's what we can do as Canadians, and that's what we want our government to do as Canadian governments and public servants, is to make sure that the sick people that are poor can have a cannabis store that they can walk into and affordably get what it is that will seriously help them in their lives. That's all we're asking for here, you know. And Jerry's at the forefront of trying to make that happen with his constitutional challenge. You know, we're going to win. I mean, there's just not a chance. We don't lose these ever. He's got so much steam now behind him in the cases we've already won. There was a court case recently, Queen's Bench in Alberta, where in the decision, it's so clear there about the need for low barrier access, about the rights of people to be able to have access to cannabis as medicine in all these different forms, that there's no constitutional, or there's no justification at all. It's unconstitutional to have limits on the amount of milligrams that are available in edibles, for example, or the potency of the extracts and things, that all these things now have to be set aside. So Jerry's got a really good chance of winning that constitutional challenge. And that's coming up April 24th to the 26th. That's what it's scheduled for at this time. In Regina, Saskatchewan. If you're in the area, you definitely want to go and support this case. This is one of the big ones. There's a few others coming up we'll update you on in shows coming up as well. But that's the real big one. And so that's what Jerry Martin's all about. That's what the Martin Medical Moment is all about, is following Jerry's path, his up and down emotional battle against our government at taxpayers' expense.
And it's really been an emotional toll too, not just for other people, but in his head too. Like, it's been up and down.
Absolutely.
That poor guy. Like, I would probably go through the same thing, because I'm just probably just as much, you know, up and down with my emotions.
I haven't had the life that you or Jerry has had with respect to those types of emotional
things that we've gone through.
And you know, I'd like to think that maybe I'm more balanced in how I would handle that. But I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I don't know when I snap. You know, I think I've been close to snapping a few times in the last little while, the last run that we've had here. And we're going to get that updated now as well. The next update that we're going to talk about is the CSP and where we're at with that, and why it is that you know, I can be close to snapping as a result of the journey that we've been on. You know, Jerry's journey has been something for him that has been very frustrating, and facing criminal sanctions, including prison and the loss of his personal items and things. For me, it's something that I care about deeply, because I'm just that kind of a guy. I don't know why. Maybe it's because I'm an Aquarius. Some of the more in-depth horoscopes I've read sort of peg me as that guy. You know, they say if you're the one that I read that I really respected, because of the way that it wasn't very vague, it was quite specific. It was quite lengthy, and it really nailed me as a human being, and in many of my attitudes and understandings. And so in that one, it said that if you're on the side of the road, broken down and in trouble, you should hope that an Aquarius drives by. And yeah, that's been me lots of times, and it's just a symbol of how I am with what's going on in our world with respect to this crisis of overdose
Hope
deaths.
my daughter grows up like that because she's got the same birthday as you.
I see.
Yes,
I know
Isabella
many other
share the
Aquarians.
same
In
name.
fact, we've just moved into the age of Aquarius.
Yeah, she was born in the age of Aquarius.
With the
2012.
past equinox that we just passed here. 3 out of my 4, well 5, so 3 out of my 5 staff
Yeah.
are also Aquarius.
Oh, there you go.
How about that?
There you go.
And all of them have serious Aquarian connections through their mums or dads or
Yeah.
whatever. So I don't know what that's all about. But I know that I'm that guy that I'm compelled, if I see somebody in trouble, I got to do something about it if
Same
I
as
can.
Capricorn with me. I did the same
And
thing.
so that's led me to where, you know, I feel like I have some way to help
Yeah.
with this overdose epidemic because of my experience with the Hearst School 16 years ago, where we provided brownies and
Yes,
edibles to
yeah.
people in this neighborhood who would report that that would get them through withdrawal and off of the drugs. And subsequently, over those 16 years, I came to know dozens and dozens of people that had been there, done that, and would tell me that cannabis had saved their life.
Yeah.
And so when this current, you know, fentanyl tainted drug supply epidemic happened, I felt like I had an answer to that.
Yeah.
And I went to my public servant, my
You
representative,
have permission
to
do what
say,
you're doing. Yeah.
you know, this is the
Start this
solution,
anyways,
you
yes.
know.
Yeah.
So I went there. Well, first I went to VANDU, that's the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, and I applied to their board for their support to go to City Hall and get City Hall's support and
Yeah.
approval to make it as easy as possible to get high-dose edibles to the people that would use them in replacement of these other drugs. So VANDU gave me unanimous approval. They understand the power of cannabis as a harm reduction tool. I went to City Hall armed with that and got nothing back from Gregor Robertson and the council at the time. Kerry Jang would hang up on me when I tried to call him personally. I tried quite hard to get City Council to acknowledge what we were wanting to do. I actually, Rob Laurie's dad, Rob Laurie is a prominent lawyer in the cannabis community. His dad had been a lobbyist at City Hall for quite a while, and I got to get a Neil out of here.
Yeah, you.
And we will real quickly here. But he lobbied the city council for a couple of months, and during that time I had gone and talked to all my dispensary owner friends. I had gathered up a bunch of donations, and I showed up 2 months after I originally put this out to city council and to the VPD. I went to VANDU and I said, I got a bunch of edibles, can I set up a table and give them out? I did that you know, in a cycle that turned into picking up cannabis during the week and giving it out on Saturdays, and 4 in a row Saturdays without ever posting I was coming back at any particular time. The 4th time I was there in a row on a Saturday, there was a long lineup of people and a bunch of volunteers wanting to help me, and that became the CSP. And we ran the CSP at VANDU for a full year on Saturdays, and then changed it to Thursdays and Sundays, and for 2.5 more years, every Thursday and Sunday, giving out about 300 care packs every time we were there through winter, summer, you name it. The City of Vancouver passed a motion that they would allow low barrier access to cannabis because of our program and the studies done by Dr. Malloy. That prompted us to look for a storefront, and that was June 26, 2019 that happened. And so we found, it was June 26, 2019 that they passed the motion, and it was in June of 2020, this past year, that myself and another business partner, after having formed a society that we were working in a collaboration with the Serious Hope Society, we found the place that we're in right now, and we opened our storefront in a conversation that we'd had originally with the city when they passed that motion, that we would find a storefront, we would open without a license. They would then scrutinize us and see if we were meeting the needs of the community in ways that they could approve. But they needed to follow the Cannabis Act. And so the licensing department got involved. And Health Canada did not respond to our emergency request for a ministerial exemption that went along with a long, comprehensive application for a license for us and our suppliers. 3 months went by without them responding to us. During that time, we were evicted. We immediately got an RV because we couldn't stop our program of giving out 420 milligrams of high-dose edibles every 4 days to the 250 people that we're doing that for, and to continue to provide low-barrier access to the over 1,800 people that had signed up as members in that 4.5-month period that we were here in this storefront, that require a place to get cannabis discreetly, that don't want to sign up for a program and say, hey, look at me, I'm on hard drugs and I need to get off. And so we have been doing that from the RV. We were raided by the VPD, who has since not hassled us because I think that they're aware that it's being processed through Health Canada, our application. Health Canada has had a really good conversation with us in response to that application. 2 weeks ago, yesterday, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago yesterday?
2 weeks ago, I think.
And they have said, 3 weeks ago, they said it would be early January. They would have that figured out for us. They apologized for how long it was taking them. And that's very, very promising for us. So we're still in the RV. We're still helping people as best we can from there. We have our fingers crossed that we're going to get the permission that we're looking for from Health Canada, and that they will allow low barrier access in Canada's communities where it's necessary, like it is here. And that's where we're at right now. So in an effort to get it all in, let's go outside just for a minute, say hi to the crew out there. I'll show those who don't know what we got going on. You're there? Yeah. All right, it's a stormy, rainy night and on the wet coast.
Where do you want me to come?
All right,
Yeah.
no, it's up to you.
I'm gonna go. I gotta go pick up friend for the game, man.
All right, we'll see you for the game coming right up. Yep. So here's our over here's our little RV. Let's show them the RV. I want that egg. I'm gonna go for that. Okay.
Pulling out the front.
Camera trick.
I'll leave the license plate on.
Ah, I see. That's what you do. I don't care about that. That's all good. Hello. What's going on in here? Smells like marijuana.
Sure is.
You guys,
Sure is.
you guys hotboxing the hippie van, are you? The Scooby Dooby van. We got Jen and Andrew and George here today, holding down the fort, keeping properly medicated. We have to have proper regular safety meetings. We are at risk out here. So we have regular safety meetings. We're protecting ourselves, from all sorts of things with the magical vapors of the cannabis plant here.
And Neil, you just missed Preston's here, and he brought Andrew and us some Coca-Cola Tic Tacs.
Oh, geez. Yeah, there is Coke on site, but not that kind of Coke. Not that there's anything wrong with that probably, but that's a whole other battle. But that's another one that the government shouldn't be wasting tax dollars about. We'll get into that on another show. But any prohibition is not right. There's really no good or bad drugs. There's just good and bad relationships with drugs. And give adult human beings the right to choose for themselves with the proper information, and we'd be a much healthier society than we are, being forced to use alcohol and tobacco and prescription medicine and other things which make a bunch of money for a bunch of friends of the government, but it's not the reality of what people would use for themselves properly if allowed to do so, if told how to do so. So that's what's going on with that. I don't know if we're going to go in. Let's go in for a minute because it's wet out here. We'll just wrap it up in time for the game. All right. I'm sure people at home like the little visits inside the Hippy Dippy van or Scooby Dooby van.
Hippy Dippy.
The Hippy Dippy Scooby
It has a
Dooby
few
van.
names.
It's got nicknames. It's what do you call love names? You know.
We call it the Mystery Machine.
These are our pet names because we love this thing. We just wish it would grow up and be taller.
That would be fantastic.
That'd be nice. If it could just, if we feed it the right vitamins and the right magical vapors, it'll grow into a community-based cannabis store.
Otherwise, I'm going to be
You know?
concussed by the time we finish with this thing.
That's right. We try to stop banging our heads. So anyway, there's a glimpse into the past year and a recap of the different things that have been going on with the show and with what the show is all about. And here. This is where we're at this point in time with our Cannabis Substitution Program. We're operating 6 days a week from 11 to 7 every day here on the same street, right pretty much in front of where our store was, and hopefully will be soon again. So this is just a moment in time where we've due to circumstance and inaction by a government that really doesn't want to help us for whatever reason that is, which we all think we know. Maybe there's a few of them. But in any case, this is where we're at. We're providing our program to the 250 plus people that get 420 milligrams every 4 days of high dose edibles made by our fantastic baker Mary, our gummy guy, Michael the Cookie Monster, so many people, I shouldn't have started naming it all, but there's just these wonderful people that help us with donations and help this all work. And so I want to thank them for the past year and all the time that each of them have put in, and anyone who's put in anything to help us be here, because it's a real joint effort of a whole bunch of people that have allowed this to get to where we are. And where we are is still helping people. Not being harassed by authorities for about 3 weeks now, and I think that's going to continue until we get a decision from Health Canada, and hopefully that'll be a good one, and that we'll be able to help people much better in this year to come. So I want to wish you all a real happy new year. There's a bunch of other shows that you can watch on Pot TV that'll keep you informed about the things going on in our pursuit for freedom for us and the plant. We have Carly Marley on Mondays with BC Bud Gal doing the 420 Lifestyle Show, the most entertainment you'll find on a Pot TV show, I think. And Wednesdays is Greg Williams, the longest running host of a Pot TV show, which goes into like a couple decades or more, and very interesting takes, and a very knowledgeable guy from Under the Influence. Both those shows start at 4 o'clock or somewhere close to that. And then Thursday, it's a morning show with BC Bud Gal, Morning Glory, Wake and Bake around 10 a.m. On Friday, Johnny B is probably still doing How's It Growing, and probably still having great guests and growing plants and showing you how to do that. And that's very important, as we are now in a world where you're even allowed to grow plants, but even before that, very important that we all grow as many plants as we can. Overgrowing the government is the way we can do this peacefully without some sort of a violent revolution. We want to do it peacefully by just growing more plants than they can control, and then maybe we'll just all be able to grow as many plants as we want, of whatever plants we want in the future, and governments will really just be public servants. So anyway, that's Johnny's show on Friday there. Saturday, we've got High Noon with Boss Lissa, bringing you up to date on stuff. Is that a shorter show, Neil?
Has been off for a bit, but it all kind of depends how long it takes to smoke the weed.
I see. No, and then when it was their 100th show, they did like
smoked 100 joints in a row on camera.
Yeah.
So
that would take a while to do as well.
I want to partake in that if somebody does that.
Yeah.
Well, 200 soon enough.
And a big shout out to Neil. You just heard him there. He's our producer extraordinaire of most of the Pot TV shows, if not all of them, and plus more. And none of this would work the way it works without him, for sure. Big thanks to Neil. I got my own show on Tuesdays. We're here almost always with the THC show. Truth, hope, and change. I hope we provided you with some truth today, some hope for the future as we stand poised to get our license for low barrier access. And if you want to help us change that, well, please contact Health Canada, contact the health minister, maybe the justice minister, maybe your local mayor, maybe your local doctor, policeman, anyone you can think of. I mean, you send off an email to somebody and you go, hey, that didn't take very long. I put my words down on paper there and sent it off, and I still got time on my hands. Who else should I send a letter to? Who else might be interested in our pursuit of freedom? Who else might be able to help us make changes in the world? So that's a really good thing to do, especially if you're isolated with time on your hands. You can become a keyboard warrior, but not on social media, with you actually getting your thoughts and words into the brains of the people that are making decisions for us, that call themselves our servants, that really need to know what is right and wrong by the looks of it. We can help tell them what's right and what's wrong. You can be a big part of that. If we all started being a big part of that, I'm telling you, things would really change. So there's some things you can do. Have a really good year. Most important, be kind to each other, be kind to yourself, because love is the answer to all of our problems. And if we look through the lens of love, we'll make way better decisions than if we look through the lens of fear. So let's try to replace fear with love. Let's try to be safe, but be sane. Let's be kind to everyone, especially ourselves. And until I see you next week on Tuesdays at 4 p.m. for the THC show, have as much fun as you can.